Hellogreedo doesn't understand canon.
Welcome to the sandbox of Star Wars creation. You can make anything you want.
Within reason.
Your only limitation is your imagination. Except you can't do that though. Hey, you can't do that. No, but there's laws. You're not allowed to do that.
Well, if you want me to suspend my disbelief for a space opera, then it might actually help if you follow some certain rules, you know?
When does a strict adherence to details pump the brakes on creative freedom?
Never, if you're smart and creative.
Because it is a give and take, right? You want your creators to have as much freedom as they possibly can, and you don't want stories to get bogged down and held back by details that often come from non-film material.
Well, actually, as someone who's an artist and is helping with various other projects, I'd actually say that actually shows who's actually really creative if you can work in those boundaries.
I'm bringing this up because I recently saw an article from IO9 making its rounds on the internet. It's titled, "Our Fascination with Canon is Killing the Way We Value Stories," and there's some truth in that, right?
No.
I've never been a hyper details-oriented Star Wars viewer.
Oh, really, Hellogreedo? Because last time I checked, the reason why you got so popular is because your breakdowns of the prequels and how they break the original trilogy because of small details.
Obviously, canon is important. Obviously, the history of our characters, the continuity of our stories, it makes the universe feel like a cohesive thing. But strictly adhering to canon and nothing else and hamstringing yourself creatively based off of some arbitrary rules that came before, that feels so soul-crushing.
Well, it entirely depends on what you mean. Like, for example, adhering to rules during a giant space battle could actually make you think a lot more creatively when it comes to the solution to how the heroes can win the battle.
You know, there's canon like Luke Skywalker is Darth Vader's son, right? Or Kylo Ren, Ben Solo is Han Solo's son, and Princess Leia's son. That's canon. We all love it, we all appreciate it. You don't care about canon? Come on, don't be disingenuous. When canon turns into like laws on what you can and can't do in your movie, in your story, especially when it's visual or based off of some piece of
I mean, that's kind of what makes the universe feel a lot more real. It allows you to suspend your disbelief, or else you'd have everyone essentially doing random bullshit, teleporting all over the place, and it would be one big fun mess. But hey, you know, that's just the details, right?
Or something that we've never seen in the franchise before, when it turns into strict adherence to laws.
Hey, no one's saying that you can't have new things. Problems arise, though, when it conflicts with things that's happened before and, you know, kind of even ruins previous actions.
Well then shit, I think some people have lost the heartbeat of Star Wars.
And what's the heartbeat of Star Wars? Everyone has a different answer.
You know, I want filmmakers, authors, you name it, to have as much creative freedom as they possibly can. One of the best examples in modern Star Wars of kind of my mindset, to clarify it a little bit, is the Holdo maneuver. I thought the Holdo maneuver was great. It was a moment of self-sacrifice.
I mean, to each their own. All it made me wonder was why the hell no one used it earlier.
And the way it was executed on screen was goddamn beautiful. But then you got people saying, "It broke the laws of the Star Wars universe!" Hey. But how did it make you feel? How did it make you feel?
Well, how it made me feel is once I actually thought about it, I realized it was fucking stupid. So I felt pissed.
It broke the laws of the Star Wars universe. Jesus Christ, I have zero desire to view any of the franchises that I love through some encyclopedic kaleidoscope of do and do nots.
So if that's the case, let's say hypothetically A New Hope begins and you see Luke Skywalker staring at the two suns, and then he immediately gets sucked through a portal and it's immediately the end of Return of the Jedi, and you get your emotional payment for Return of the Jedi, but at the same time, you know, you did not see a single bit that happened in between. You know, why can't someone do that? Maybe, you know, because there's a structure in place of this shit. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
And what laws are we talking about here? What canon, what details, what complaints?
Well, I'm sure other people have different answers, but for me personally, Why the fuck didn't they use that move before? Would have saved a lot of rebels. Or, I'm sorry, resistance.
Well, Wikipedia says that when ships go into hyperspace, they're going into an alternate dimension. So a complaint that I've heard is that Holdo's ship would have ceased to exist in this dimension, and rather it would take a hyperspace lane in another dimension where contact with this dimension was impossible.
Hey, that actually sounds like a perfectly valid response. Maybe, I don't know, Ryan Johnson could have thought of something else. Use his creative noggin. Like the creator that he is, apparently.
And this is exactly the type of shit that I'm talking about. Sorry, if that's what you're focusing on in this scene, again, losing the heartbeat of Star Wars. And let's face it, a lot of explanations for a lot of things in Star Wars came well after the fact when maybe someone decided there's a little need for an explanation, right?
Is there anything wrong with that, Greedo? I mean, it kind of helps make the universe feel a lot more cohesive.
Some supplemental material came out explaining a thing that happened years ago in a movie. Another complaint that I've heard is, why isn't this method used all the time? Which, yeah, of course, right? But let's face it, if we start talking about why didn't they thises and why don't they do thoses in Star Wars, we'll be here for a very long time.
I agree to some extent. Like, for example, why didn't the characters shoot this person instead of that person in the middle of battle? Yeah, I could see that complaint. But when it comes to the Holdo maneuver, there's a very, very good reason why the fuck they could have done that earlier to absolutely no extra casualties to the resistance.
And again, explanations come after the fact. Rise of Skywalker even touched on it, and I'm sure future material will touch on it too. And then we'll have new details and new laws and new explanations. This shit is always changing.
Well, there's a reason for that. We just want things to make sense. Is there anything wrong with that, Greedo?
I've heard more complaints too, but for the sake of brevity, most are along the same lines, right? And I've heard counter arguments that talk about like a ship's wake, right? Like a boat's wake, but a hyperspace wake. Weaponizing a powerful wake. Like if you're in your kayak and some asshole in a big boat blew by you, going too fast and too close. You might spill your beer or take a dip in the drink. But this is all just details. Again, I've never been a hyper details-oriented Star Wars viewer because when that kind of stuff is focused on, instead of like the emotional impact of a narrative, it bogs things down for me.
Again, explain why you spent so much time on the little details of the prequels then. Why couldn't you just get into the emotional story of a man slowly turning into darkness in Revenge of the Sith?
That's supplemental stuff. That is supplemental stuff. You don't need it. You don't. It's just there for some fun information, right? The heartbeat of Star Wars is not in the tiny inconsequential details and laws and rules that do not impact a narrative that you might find skimming through a Millennium Falcon schematic book.
But all this stuff, to at least some extent, actually does impact the narrative. Like, for example, in your precious TLJ, the really janky way that those really, really awful bombers work impact the narrative. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the really, really, really fun, annoying story that spends half the running time not really doing much, and the other half the time bashing the Star Wars franchise. But I'm getting ahead of myself, you know?
Fun, don't get me wrong, they're fun, but they're supplemental, and god damn it, they have changed so often over the years. If something like the Holdo maneuver, in all of its visual awesomeness and god-speed rebels, breaks the quote-unquote laws of the universe, then hey, let's break some more laws.
No, Greedo, that is fucking stupid. How about we have something that's cohesive?
You know, after a Star Wars movie comes out, I tend to do what a lot of you guys do. I go down a rabbit hole of reviews on YouTube and reading some critic and audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes. And oftentimes, the reviewers who harp on canon or an abundance of details rarely, if ever, talk about the emotional impact of a scene or a story.
Got any examples of that, buddy?
It's like an algorithmically generated analysis. A detective board spread out in front of you with red yarn connecting various details to make sure things are in line. And that kind of bums me out. And that's honestly why, if I'm going to watch a Star Wars movie review on YouTube, I prefer to watch them from, regular movie reviewers, not just Star Wars movie reviewers or Star Wars YouTubers, or people who talk about Star Wars constantly on YouTube because, it can be topical at times. I prefer to watch Star Wars movie reviews from like Chris Stuckman or Jeremy Johns.
But wait, Jeremy Johns is kind of one of those Star Wars lore nuts who likes to read the books and stuff. Well, to at least some extent, but still. Also, Chris Stuckman doesn't really say much in his reviews, so I don't know. I'd rather go with someone who actually explains stuff than someone who just kind of says some very, very, very basic stuff and then gives you a grade.
Agree or disagree, I find their opinions to be a much more pure look at those movies as movies, not lined up against some laws or things that some fans might think the films or the movies or the stories or the visuals or whatever need to adhere to. Again, I think it's more pure.
Yes, we can't have those pesky Star Wars fans trying to make sure that their world is cohesive, that they love to study and enjoy reading about so much. Those pesky fans and details.
And what laws are we Every Star Wars movie that's ever come out has done new stuff that people bitched about, that kind of trampled on the previous movies, right? That's always been the thing.
That doesn't make it right, Greedo. It's going to be annoying no matter what, but the more you criticize it, then there's always a chance it will get better in the next one. What do you have against things making sense?
Restricting creative freedom for new fun and inventive ideas because of some wishy-washy, loosey-goosey Star Wars laws sounds like the most soul-killing knife in the heart of a franchise thing I can imagine.
Actually, if anything, it can force you to be a lot more creative. A good example that comes to mind is with the original Silent Hill video game. Because of technicals, it required the team to restrict their creative ability when making the town in order for the technicals to actually function and be a lot more desirable looking as a product, I guess you could say. So that's when they actually had to be a lot more creative, and they came up with the idea of the fog. And then they actually decided to make a lore reason for that. Guess what? That creative decision, because of restrictions, actually made the game a lot better. Oh, gee whiz. It's almost like restrictions can help sometimes.
Artistic freedom!
While those R2-D2 jetpack legs would have been really convenient in the original trilogy.
Star Wars Episode 10 begins. The film opens, Luke Skywalker is alive. He's always been alive, actually. Don't think about the other ones. That's just details. And then he throws Darth Vader, who's also alive, don't ask questions, into the sun, and it's the coolest fucking explosion in the world. And I believe that is the true heart of Star Wars.